Hello and welcome back to the VolReport Show. I'm Ryan Sylvia, joined by Noah Taylor. We're with VolReport.com and the Rivals Network. And talking season has begun. That's what they like to say when SEC Media Days begins. And now that's wrapped up. The final speakers talked yesterday. As we go to record this, they just dropped the All-SEC preseason teams. Two Vols selected, James Pierce Jr. and Cooper Mays. And then the order of finish predictions with Tennessee coming in 7th. We'll get to all of that. Let's just start with your takeaway from Media Days. Obviously, they don't talk about too much, but what did you think about what Josh Heupel said?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was just the depth he talked about defensively. That's kind of been – I think we all kind of agree that this offense will take a step forward. Obviously took a little bit of a step back last year because of some inconsistencies at quarterback and receiver. I think you're going to see that short up this year. So I think we're going into – fall camp feeling pretty good about where Tennessee's at offensively. But the biggest question mark, which has kind of been the question mark all 3-4 years that Josh Heupel's been here, is, how good could this defense be? And depth's obviously a big part of that. There was kind of an exodus this year with some guys going to the transfer portal. Not huge losses by any means, but you did lose a number of guys. But I think they did a good job in the transfer portal bringing some guys in. Obviously, because of injuries last year, you got an opportunity to see some young guys step up, and now they're going to be a little bit grown up, or at least you think they would. So I think the biggest takeaway was Josh Heupel speaking about that and how good he feels, and there just seemed to be a lot of confidence there, which I think is a good sign for Tennessee because, again, I think we know the offense will be better. If that defense can kind of match that, that'd be huge for Tennessee.
Yeah, I think specifically in that secondary, as you were talking about, it is a big deal. He was asked about that youth in the secondary. Obviously, not a lot of experience there, but maybe just pure talent, maybe the most talented secondary he's had. But obviously, there's the mental aspect and the experience aspect of playing in the defensive secondary as well. But he said he has full confidence in them. And then for Nico, he said they expect him to hit the ground running. Obviously, you expect your quarterback, especially a redshirt freshman quarterback, making his second start of his career in week 1, to progress as the season goes on. But they're not going to sit around and wait for him to get to full speed. The expectation is week 1 against Chattanooga, you're ready to go and you're ready to win football games, because week 2, you do have a decent test in NC State. That's a good football team. And it's in Charlotte. I expect Tennessee fans to cover it in orange, as they usually do for these neutral site and away games. But geographically, that is an advantage to NC State. So that could be an interesting game. And then week 4, you have Oklahoma on the road. And obviously, that's going to be a big game with Oklahoma, first game in the SEC, and then the ties to Josh Heupel and Joey Halzle to return back to Oklahoma. There's all those storylines. So Nico's getting thrown to the fire a little bit. He'll have that tune-up game against Chattanooga, but he's got to be good and he's got to be good quick. But it looks like Heupel has confidence in him that he'll be able to do that. Let's touch on those All-SEC preseason teams, though. I know we voted for more Tennessee players than got on the list, and obviously we have more exposure to them. We're talking to them. We're watching them at practice. We watch every snap that they play. So maybe inherently, just because of our familiarity with the roster, there's a little bit of bias. But we had more than just James Pierce Jr. and Cooper Mays. If you want to see our full ballots, we did drop them over at VolReport.com. It'll be up there. How we voted. VolReport reveals their SEC Media Day ballots. You don't have to go over your whole list, but maybe who are some guys that you expected to maybe get a nod for that All-SEC team and didn't end up getting honored?
Yeah, I'll start with Dylan Sampson. I'm a little bit surprised there. Obviously a guy that's, came in his freshman year in 2022. It really played in kind of a crowded room his first year and a little bit to start last year. Obviously by the end of last year, even halfway through last year, he had taken that number 2 spot behind Jalen Wright. Kind of leapfrogged, I guess, Jabari Small there halfway through the year. And obviously Jalen Wright had an incredible season. But I thought that maybe he'd get a little bit more love. I think that you've seen him, his ability to not just run the ball and be explosive, but catch the ball too. Had a couple touchdowns receiving last year. I think he's a versatile back. There's nobody really – I think that was one of the toughest votes for me on this ballot was running back, because there's not – obviously the SEC every year produces some really great backs. There's nobody this year that really jumped off the page to me to where I thought that, Dylan Sampson would be completely left off, because you get 3 teams. You'd think, he's been good enough to land on one of those first, second, or third teams. And Evidently, I guess the voters thought otherwise, but I thought he's a guy that's shown a lot the last couple of years, and certainly this is the year that he'll be, the number one guy. I expect him to have a very good year.
For me, it was Trevor Etienne that jumped out. Obviously, really nice career at Florida. Now you get a run behind Georgia's offensive line and the threat of when you take that step from the Florida offense, which was probably better than a lot of people expected, but still not great, to the Georgia offense. You expect a jump in numbers, maybe not bulk of numbers, but like yards per carry, that type of thing. So to me, he was the clearer one, but I thought Dylan Sampson also maybe deserved a little bit more recognition. I had him as the number 4 running back, so maybe that technically doesn't even give him a spot on the team, but I thought he would get more love than what he did. This one's kind of funny. I know I can't imagine many people pay attention to long snapping, but I thought Matthew Solansky maybe deserved an honor there. I mean, who else? To me, it was like, who else was a captain for like every single game last year? Matthew, what other long snapper in the conference can say that? So I'm sure a lot of people just voted for whatever team they cover. It's all right, that whatever long snapper can get the nod, I'll be nice there. And we both gave him long snapper one as well. So it's not like we didn't do that. But like I said, I genuinely think that maybe he deserved it just because of who else is captain that often at the long snapper position. So that one, maybe Jackson Ross doesn't make the punter list. I voted for him for punter as well, just because the way he finished last season. But obviously, a lot of other really good punters in the league as well. Kai Kroger from South Carolina is probably the most popular one, and there's a handful of other guys. But I expected more than 2. You look down the list, and it's like I'm not sure where it would have necessarily came from. I know you voted John Campbell Jr. For one of the offensive lineman positions. I voted Javonte Spraggins. We'll see how he recovers from injury. Brew McCoy got a vote from you. Obviously, we both voted James Pierce Jr. You had Keenan Peely as well. So there's a few guys here and there that I thought maybe one more would sneak in, but 2 just feels like a low number for me. I don't know. Yeah. We'll get to the team, though. Number 7 in the conference. It's the top half, 16 teams this year with Oklahoma and Texas. We both had them at number 5 in the conference. So we both had them a little bit higher. What are your thoughts on number 7, though? Does that feel right?
It feels a little low to me. I think I will say something you mentioned earlier in the show was you talked about that NC State matchup that going on the road to Oklahoma. I think this schedule is a little tougher than people give it credit for. Obviously, there's some favorable matchups. You get Alabama at home, you get Florida at home in back-to-back weeks, but it's still Alabama and Florida, and obviously NC State's a team I think will be better than people maybe are recognizing right now. And then Oklahoma is going to be tough regardless of how they are. At the end of the year, you're playing them. That's their first SEC game. So I can maybe see why if people look a little closer at the schedule and see Tennessee's breaking in a first-time full-time starter at quarterback, maybe it takes a little bit to kind of find their footing, but they're ultimately able to get to 9 wins or so. But I do think it's a little low. I think it's, you look at some of the schools ahead of them on paper. I mean, I feel like Ole Miss should be really good. I mean, they've killed the transfer portal.
Yeah. But they should always be really good.
Yeah, they should always. That's the thing. That's the thing that bothers me about the pick is, it feels like the last 2 or 3 years we've been saying that about them, and it's been a little bit maybe underwhelming on their part. But Missouri's one I voted kind of high. Just because their schedule is incredibly easy. Their path to not only win double-digit games again, but even get into the playoff is definitely possible for them. And then obviously the top 2, I think we both voted for Georgia and Texas. Clearly a lot of people did. But and then Alabama is still going to have a lot of talent there, obviously left over. It'll be interesting to see how they do with Kalen DeBoer. I do think they take a step back, definitely. But, people have them pretty high. So I don't have that much of a problem with some of the teams ahead of Tennessee, but 7 feels kind of low. I mean, I think they could be certainly better than that. And I know we've talked about it. I think they're safely a team that you could safely say right now, if you were to tell me they get in the playoff, I don't think it would shock anybody. But they're certainly teetering at worst to get into it.
Yeah, I feel like they're balancing that line of in the playoffs, out the playoffs. I think 10-2, you're in the playoffs. 9-3, you're probably looking on the outside. And right now, I have this team as a 9-3 squad that's probably just on the outside looking in. But I agree. I mean, you look at the teams ahead of Tennessee, and it's like guess you can't be too upset if you're Tennessee right now, because a lot of these schools, like, they're supposed to be pretty good. And then Missouri, whether you think they're a good team or not, like you said, that schedule just is really beneficial. I think it's interesting to note that Tennessee's ahead of Oklahoma on it. I guess that means a lot of people think Tennessee will go into Norman and beat Oklahoma, which Tennessee's roster, I feel like if that's at a neutral site or Neyland, I like Tennessee in that game. But with it in Norman at Oklahoma, that might prove a little tricky with Nico playing his first true road environment. We'll see how he deals with that. But yeah, I don't know. The number 7 being like you're almost right in the middle of the SEC doesn't feel right. This feels like better than an average SEC team. But at the same time, it's tough to make an argument over some of these teams. I will say you had Alabama at number 3. I had Alabama at number 6 behind Tennessee at 5. That roster is still really talented. Kalen DeBoer is recruiting at a really high level still. But I don't know. I feel like they're going to take a small step back, and a small step back maybe gets you to 10-2, 9-3. And I expect this team to lose to Tennessee in Neyland, at least at this point in the offseason. So to me, I had them a little bit lower. And then I'm trying to say I had them over Missouri as well. So I guess that's the 2 teams that I had them leapfrog. You had them leapfrogging Ole Miss and LSU to be in 5th place. So it kind of feels bunched up at that top, though, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Is you could make an argument for really the top 8 teams to all be in contention somewhere in that top 5. So it's not that big of a deal, though, I guess, at the end of the day. Moving on, though, to just kind of the SEC as a whole landscape, I just wanted to touch on a few things, just kind of talk some SEC football. One, I want to talk about Florida. We mentioned them earlier, how that is an interesting game. Like, it's Florida, so you can't go into it expecting a win, especially if you're Tennessee. But doesn't it also feel weird that Florida team is so far in these standings, and Tennessee's going into the season? It feels like that should be a win that you kind of sleepwalk through. And when they spoke at media days, it was almost an afterthought. Like, I don't know. To me, that feels weird that Florida football is that far low in the totem pole right now in the SEC.
Yeah, no, it's like you said, it's a game historically that Tennessee can't overlook, but it kind of feels like it's not that big of a game in terms of the rest of the games on their schedule right now. I mean, Tennessee feels like how the last few years have gone under Josh Heupel, that they're trending more towards that Alabama game and that Georgia game, the 2 juggernauts of this league. Now you add Texas into that, but the last decade or so, it's certainly been Alabama, now been Georgia since Kirby Smart's been there. It kind of feels like that's kind of where Tennessee's focus, or maybe that's where they're kind of trying to be like those are the 2 teams that they are kind of competing with for that top spot. That's who they want. That's kind of their next goal. They got a little bit of that in 2022 by beating Alabama in Neyland Stadium. And then a couple weeks later, you're playing for essentially a college football playoff spot against Georgia on the road. That didn't go well for Tennessee, but it was a big time game. And it's kind of feeling like that Florida rivalry, even though it's, Florida beat them last year in Gainesville. It feels weird looking at it from that perspective, but it's hard not to with the way that things are set up right now, because realistically, I will say, I think it's a talented Florida team. I think that, if you told me last year that they won 5 games, I would have said, well, that's because you went and got Graham Mertz as your quarterback who was not very good at Wisconsin outside of his first season. He turned out not to be the problem for them.
No.
And he's coming into this year as probably one of the better quarterbacks in the league. So I think there's talent there, but the problem I think with Florida is, for one, there was a couple wins last year. You go back to that Missouri game, you leave their best player on the field wide open on a 4th and 20 or whatever at the end of the game. You lose to Arkansas on a missed field goal at the end. That's probably 7 wins there. But if you look closer, I mean, a lot of it's just coaching malpractice, bad decision-making. I don't know that you can get better at that if you're already a bad decision-making coach, So I don't know if that's necessarily going to change for Billy Napier. And then if that happens, you lose Miami. I think it's such a tough schedule too. You lose to Miami in week 1. Yeah, I think they play Stanford or somebody week 2. And then a couple weeks later, you lose to like Texas A&M or UCF.
UCF I think is an interesting one too.
Yeah.
KJ Jefferson, KJ Jefferson's a good quarterback. Yep. He's done it in the SEC at Arkansas.
Beat him last year in Gainesville too, so he's got that experience playing there. I think that's going to be the problem for Florida, is not necessarily having talent. I mean, you look at the list here; they've got a couple guys on it that are on there, but I think the problem's going to be you lose that first game against Miami, and then it's going to be like, okay, well, here we go. You lose the next one. By the time you get to Tennessee, which that game's in October this year, a little bit later than usual, I don't know that Billy Napier's the head coach when he comes to Tennessee. And if Florida's kind of given up at that point because they don't have a head coach or they're about not to have a head coach, they're kind of one of the weirder teams to predict here. But I would err on the side that they're probably going to not be good because that schedule's just so tough and there's just such a small room for error for this team. They're certainly past the point of like Billy Napier had some head-scratching quotes at Media Day about being on schedule and things like that and building. And we're in the age of college football now. It's like what Josh Heupel said about Nico. We can't really afford for him to like learn on the job anymore, I guess. Mm-hmm. That's just kind of the state of college football. It's certainly the state of the SEC right now. I don't think anybody with the transfer portal, NIL, all those things, I don't think you can really afford these slow 1 or 2 or 3 year rebuilds anymore. So that is a weird game on Tennessee's schedule for sure.
You talked about Billy Napier, like, hey, what if he doesn't have a job at the time Tennessee plays him? I think Tennessee will play a Billy Napier-led Florida squad. I can't imagine it gets – like, I think they would almost have to lose to Samford for that to happen at that point, just because it's so early in the season. But would it not be the most Tennessee thing ever for Billy Napier to get fired the week heading into the Tennessee game, and then an interim head coach beats Tennessee in Neyland Stadium? So – you almost hope that doesn't happen for Tennessee's sake, just because that series gets so weird. But, like, yeah, I had them at 14 out of 16, the third worst team in the conference. The only teams I had worse than them were Vanderbilt and Arkansas, who I didn't expect to win a single SEC game this season. And I think Florida's good enough to win a couple. But as you talked about, I mean, there's not really any gimmies besides Samford on that schedule. So, realistically, I saw – I forget who said this, but someone was like, I mean, they could be, like, the 25th best team in the country and still be an underdog in like 7 or 8 games on their schedule, just because of how tough that schedule is. So it's rough in Gainesville. I know that makes a lot of Tennessee fans pretty happy, but I also, you talked about Graham Mertz and how all of a sudden he's like considered maybe top half quarterback in the SEC, which you probably didn't expect heading into last season. Where's Nico on this list? How high is Nico? It's tough to judge a guy who started one game and he played pretty well in it, but at the same time, like, they weren't throwing the ball all over the field or anything. So where do you rank Nico in the SEC? Maybe I don't need like an exact number because I'm putting you on the spot. But like, where's the range that Nico you think fits in?
Yeah, it's funny when those lists came out the other day, ahead of Media Day, where every pundit is like, here's my top 7 or top 8, I guess, quarterbacks, that top half of the league. I think potential wise, you could certainly say that he's up there and among the best. We saw a little bit of it in that Citrus Bowl, but you're right. It's hard to say with a guy that's played one meaningful game in his career. But I mean, it's also a quarterback heavy league. I feel like, especially at that top half, obviously this is kind of an obvious one here, but like every really good team in this league has also a really, really good QB. Carson Beck, obviously Quinn Ewers. I know those guys, those are the 2 that were obviously voted first team at quarterback. But you look at Jackson Dart. He's been at Ole Miss now, it seems like a decade. So a lot of experience there. Another really talented player. Nussmeier at LSU has been there a long time, it feels like at this point, and he's kind of taken the reins there. Connor Wigman at Texas A&M, kind of a small sample size guy too, because he got injured. But, we've seen him play up to his best of his ability, and he's pretty good as well. I think it's just tough to gauge, but certainly by year's end, I feel pretty good about saying that Nico is in that top half for sure. I just think it's hard to gauge that right now. But, I mean, I think you'd say the same thing. I mean, I think we could stand by that this offense is going to be drastically improved under him, and not just because of him. I think the weapons around him they've upgraded with some of the transfer portal additions at wide receiver. Your offensive line is incredibly experienced. I think that running backs room is not going to miss that much of a beat, even with Jalen Wright gone and Jabari Small gone. So I think that's going to help him tremendously too. I think the weapons he has around him offensively are going to be, a lot better than what Joe had last year. And so I think by year's end, he's definitely a top 5 quarterback in the SEC.
You hit on a couple of points I really like. One, the year's end. Like, is this a list going into the season, or is this a list when we get to week 12? Because going into the year, yeah, I mean, he's really young, but And we did talk about how there isn't an expectation to learn on the job or to be bad and then get good. Like they expect him to be good out the gate, but there is going to be an increase in experience, which leads to being a better quarterback by the end of the season. So I do think that's interesting to note. Like, are we ranking them on Friday, July 19th, or are we ranking them heading into a bowl game?
Yeah.
I think I put him at number 6 right now. I go Carson Beck 1, Quinn Ewers at 2, Jalen Milroe at 3, Jackson Dart at 4, Brady Cook at 5, and then I think I slide in Nico there at 6. I've liked what I've seen from him. You look at his limited sample size, but he's done a really good job. I put together kind of that highlight tape of him throwing on the run, and for being like an 18, 19-year-old kid in his true freshman season with not a lot of experience, like he hits his targets at a really impressive clip. And I think just that kind of natural talent, along with having a year in the system to know what Josh Heupel wants, will go a long way. But the other thing that I thought you hit was the weapons around him. Like last year, Joe Milton wasn't perfect by any means, but he didn't necessarily have the wide receiver weapons around him that they did in 2022. Like you can't really replace Jalen Hyde and Cedric Tillman in the blink of an eye, but there were some guys that needed to step up. We expected to step up and maybe didn't answer the call to the level that we thought they would. Well, Tennessee's addressed that. Obviously, you get Squirrel White and Brew McCoy back. We'll see. Brew McCoy looks like he's trending towards being fine for the opener, but obviously that's a tough injury to come back from. But let's say Brew McCoy needs a little bit more time. You address that through the transfer portal. You bring in a Chris Brazzell. Dante Thornton's healthy after his late season injury last season. And then you have some guys now that stepped up towards the end of last season, like a Chaz Nimrod, Caleb Webb, that now have a lot more experience. Mike Matthews is somehow going to have to get into this mix because he's such a good receiver. He's a true freshman, and it's a loaded receiver room, but he's phenomenal. And we saw that in the orange and white game, and he's going to somehow have to insert himself into this lineup in his first year. So there's a lot of weapons there. I think maybe there's a little bit more trust because they like what Nico can do, but also because of the weapons you have at receiver. So overall, I think that, that should be a step up for the offense as a whole. And like I said, I'll put Nico above Connor Wegman. I'll put him above Garrett Nussmeier. I'll put him above Graham Mertz and Jackson Arnold and go down the list because of what we've seen at this point. And I expect that to get better as the year goes on. That'll do it all, or that'll do it for us today here at the VolReport Show. Make sure you head over to VolReport.com. We have everything you need from SEC Media Days as we transition from SEC Media Days to Tennessee Media Days, which will come up in a couple weeks. Basketball news, as always. Lady Vols get a couple commits in the form of twins. So if you want to hear about what Kim Caldwell is doing over on the Lady Vols side of basketball, VolReport's where you need to be. And then also Rick Barnes and his staff have been extending offers, setting up visits, and doing everything they need to do on the recruiting trail. So if you need to or want to hear about the future of Tennessee men's basketball as well, we got you covered. And then MLB draft just went down. Tennessee has 8 players selected, including Christian Moore, inside the top 10 by the Angels. So we have the full recaps and everything you need there, along with transfer portal commitments and everything you need in Tennessee baseball as they look to reload for another championship run. Really everything you need under the umbrella of Tennessee athletics over at VolReport.com. Links to everything you need is in the description. Thank you for watching.